Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Good old Turkey Day. Good old stuff your face with dressing and trimming and all the other words for bread-based stuff. Oh yeah, and turkey. And then you sleep it off, and everyone wants to blame tryptophan. Something like that. But it's not the tryptophan. It's the it's the effect of eating all that extra food and getting all those carbohydrates all at once and all that protein. And your body's like, I can't do it. Food coma.
Yeah. Like, yeah, try to eat all your calories for one week and in one sitting. It'll put you out, and it don't matter if it's tryptophan or not.
I don't care how much somebody normally eats. If you eat a Thanksgiving-sized meal at any point during the day, like, nobody eats like that every day. Well, maybe a few people do, but they're not the focus of this rant.
Well, and even the people that were supposedly eating like that, I doubt Michael Phelps actually ate 6,000 calories every day. I was always super skeptical about that type of shit where they're like, yeah, they're trained so much they need 6,000 calories. Who's got all that fucking time, man?
What are they eating that's packed with that many calories, and how are they able to, like, how is their digestive system able to function? I mean, I'm thinking like that's got to be like a solid protein bar, like pure protein, probably tastes horrible, like leather.
Oh, definitely. I've watched a lot of the power lifters and bodybuilders videos of their caloric intakes over the day, and these are people who are working out 3 times a day, so they're taking in, sometimes 8 to 10,000 calories, but a lot of it is in the form of like shakes, or they're not even eating stuff that is necessarily enjoyable because it can't be high in fat. So they're just drinking like 10 protein shakes over the course of a day. So in that, yeah, it's got to be disastrous on their digestive system. So I can't imagine that type of lifestyle actually being healthy, like at all, short or long term. There's no way that I've always been sort of skeptical about the bodybuilding scene in the first place. But I think a lot of the stuff that they're doing is just in pursuit of an unattainable or an unsustainable end that in the process is very destructive, and it is not by no means healthy. By no measurement is the things that they do to become competitive bodybuilders healthy on any level. But because they get trophies and they get accolades and shit, people just don't think about the fact that the people on stage are, yeah, they're ripped and they're huge, but they're basically near death when they're on stage. That's like what people, I think, don't really grasp about bodybuilders is when they're at like 2% body fat, and like some people, their organs start shutting down.
Oh yeah. Well, when you get the wrong kind of nutrients, or you don't have the right kind of vitamins in your system, everything starts functioning strangely. If you don't have potassium and sodium in your diet, you're on the cellular level, the potassium and sodium pumps stop working, and then your mitochondria stop producing energy, and then they start failing, and then you get cellular breakdown. That's horrible shit.
And it's like it goes to the extreme in that I remember reading an article about this bodybuilder who he had pushed his body so far that during a competition, he hit a pose and his body had just run out of nutrients mid-pose and he couldn't unclench his muscles. So he basically got stuck in a pose and had a heart attack because his body did not have enough nutrients for him to unclench. So he basically had a full body Charlie horse is the easiest way to describe it. And he did not have enough nutrients to unclench. And the only reason that he survived is because they got him to the hospital in time enough to get the hydrating like nutrients back into his system so that he could unclench. And it's like, I think he might've had 2 or 3 heart attacks in the course of that. But it was like, you know, he definitely almost died, but that's like what everybody who's a bodybuilder is on the verge of every time they hit the stage. And people
you
not. So go ahead.
You mentioned 10,000 calories. There are 440 calories in a king size Snickers bar, and so it only require 22 3/4 king size Snickers bars to hit 10,000 calories.
But you can't eat those because of the fat content and the sugar content. So they wouldn't be able to do that realistically. It sounds like
you'd get.
I mean, no, it's not even about sickness. It would ruin their diet, so they wouldn't be able to actually gain muscle and not fat because the sugar content and the fat content is so high. That's what I'm saying. Like, you can't just eat Big Macs or you can't just eat like steak, or you can't just eat a bunch of French fries to fill the calories. It has to be like lean. It has to be healthy. It has to be balanced. It can't be too heavy in protein, or it can't be too heavy in carbohydrates. It has to be perfectly balanced, or else that imbalance builds up over time. So that's where it's like
10 Big Mac meals.
I mean, and that's why, yeah, dude. And this is what I mean. It has to be like they're drinking like 10 large nutrient shakes over the course of the day or some shit, and then eating like 3 breasts of chicken and some peas that aren't seasoned, no sauce. Like, you can't put too much salt in it, no butter. So it's like, these are people who can't eat and have pleasure while they're eating if they're actually wanting to get to their goal. So they're taking in 10,000 bland ass calories every fucking day. Bland calories.
Boiled chicken.
Yeah, dude.
No salt.
You can't put too much, no salt, no butter, no oil. And that's where, again, it's like, you know,
I've seen videos of guys who take a chicken breast, a cooked chicken breast, and they chop it up, and then they throw it in the blender with their protein shake to increase the protein content of their protein shake, because it's easier to drink a blended chicken than it is to eat one. It requires less energy to consume.
And this is where it's like the way that they were presenting Michael Phelps's diet, it's as if he's out there eating a bunch of Big Macs. Michael Phelps could eat 20 Big Macs. No, the fuck he couldn't, because the fat content is too high. So there's no way he'd be able to do that and still function at the way, like at the level he's functioning. He can eat 6,000 calories worth of shit, but he can't eat 6,000 calories worth of fucking chicken nuggets and still be Michael Phelps. So that's where the media will portray that to try to like push chicken nuggets or push double cheeseburgers or some shit, like, because I remember the Dream Team was like promoting triple cheeseburgers. Like, there was a basketball promotion with McDonald's as if Michael Jordan's out eating fucking triple cheeseburgers ever. If not, like, he's definitely not eating a triple cheeseburger before playing a fucking Olympic game. But they were trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, you eat this triple cheeseburger, you can dunk from the free throw line too, just like Michael Jordan. Just get some Nikes and this triple cheeseburger and you can dunk. Just do it, man. Do it.
Maybe if you draw the free throw line in front of your toilet.
Yeah, man.
I mean, oh crap, I just gave the worst idea to the internet. drawing the court lines of a basketball court around the toilet's actually a terrible idea. I'm really sorry to whoever.
Put a scoreboard in there.
Yeah, whoever ends up with this in their bathroom, I'm apologizing to your girlfriend and or your kid's mom. I'm really sorry about that. That's my bad. You're welcome.
Yeah.
That's
somebody'll do it.
It's interesting though. Like you mentioned, these are people who are eating terribly. Well, they're eating a lot of food, but they're eating food that doesn't taste good to accomplish a goal. And it reminds me that on the other end, and that's not an inexpensive lifestyle. That's a very expensive lifestyle. But there are also people out there who are eating food that doesn't taste good, like McDonald's meals, and they're not able to reach their goals. And I think it's interesting that we're at this really terrible place in society where it's more affordable to eat food from McDonald's. For a lot of people, they don't have the time to go to the store. They don't have the time to prepare a meal. They don't have the time to clean up afterwards.
Sorry, go ahead.
And it's just that kind of deficit in time that it makes it seem like they're making poor decisions, but they're limited. These are people who are economically limited.
Well, I remember when I was an undergrad, I came to the realization that like somehow a double cheeseburger became cheaper than an apple. At some point, the American economy made it cheaper for someone to be able to acquire a double cheeseburger than an apple. A double cheeseburger was like 99 cents, and like an apple would be like $1.59 at the least. Like the least you could pay to get an apple would be like $1.59. And this was back in like 2000, maybe 4, maybe 3, maybe 2000, something like that. I don't think it's really changed much at all. But at the same time, it's like the way that our diet and our time is distributed, it's impossible for someone to actually make themselves a healthy meal in time relative to the job in which they're traveling back and forth. Like if you're remote working, it's easy. But if you're stuck in a car 2-3 hours a day, there's no way you're making your own fucking healthy food.
Yeah. One of my friends mentioned that they would be so excited to be able to just go out and do things because they're always working, and they make time to go to the store and to cook food. So that's, in a sense, that's what they spend their free time doing. We're getting a package delivered, and so Bruce is freaking out. Hey, bud, it's just FedEx. He's got a lot to say right now, apparently.
Yeah,
I know.
He's the most expressive dog.
He's got so much to say.
Yeah, and it's never just like barking.
Nope.
It's like he's trying to say some shit.
I'd like to thank the Bruiser Buster 9000 for his advances in communication. Come on, dude. It's okay. I know.
You would think he hadn't eaten in days or some shit, but no, that's just the way he talks, man. That's so funny.
He freaks out when Sheila calls, or when if I get a phone call and it's on speaker, he'll come in and start talking to whomever I'm talking to. It's great. He knows that whoever's on speaker though they might as well be here,
right?
And so he just gets excited. He actually responds to like video chat or video calls really well. He'll sit and stare at the phone and carry a complete conversation with Sheila for 5-10 minutes. And it's hilarious to see a dog run out of things to say because they get really quiet, and then they just stare at you, and then they go do something else.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with how much you enculture them too. They're not going to be expressive unless they like have seen a person be expressive.
Oh, he's just letting me know that the FedEx people are backing out, trying not to break my fence or hit my car.
Yeah, I heard someone explain it like the way our hearing is dampened by walls. For dogs, it's as if those walls aren't there, and they can just hear everything as if it's like right there to them, which is why it's like shit that's a block away. I was walking to do the laundry the other night, and I like coughed or something. And then I heard a bunch of dogs start barking where I'm like, man, they really can just hear fucking everything. And it was like dogs in different apartments, which is where I'm like, I don't know if then they started hearing each other barking, but I was in a spot where it was like, I felt bad because then, there's dogs in probably like 5 different apartments barking just because I coughed.
Well, last night, just last night, I was turning the lights off, and Bruce starts making this really strange noise, like something's happening. And I look out the window, and this car just slides through the intersection across the street, hits the boulder in my neighbor's yard, and then plows into one of their cars, like head-on collision with a parked car. And,
oh my god! Last night, you said?
Yeah, last night, like at I don't know, around midnight or something like that. And so I'm standing there. And I just watched this happen. And so I grab my headlamp and I get my jacket, put my shoes on to go out there. And as right as I get out to the driveway, the car backs out of their yard or out of their driveway and then drives off, like speeds off. Like obviously they just plowed into somebody's car. And, so I call 911 and say, hey, there was a accident. Some people just left. They just drove into my neighbor's car. They send a sheriff out. I talk to the sheriff. Sheriff leaves. At one point, these guys came back and were trying to remove their bumper. And
whoa! Oh my god!
Like this is the thing though. Like there's a car that's missing a bumper cowl. It's missing a big,
obviously out there somewhere.
Yeah, it's in my neighbor's driveway. But yeah, this car is out there somewhere.
Oh my god!
It's a Camry. These were like high school students or college students, maybe. And so it clearly is not their car.
Yeah.
So that thing's going to get fixed. There's going to be an order made. They're going to get caught no matter what happens. We're living in a technologically networked era.
Definitely. But it's crazy that shit happened last night because I feel like I saw a car full of thieves being pursued by a police officer. So it's like it would have been right around that same time too. It was but it definitely wasn't a Camry. It was a Mustang. And the only reason I know this is because I was sitting. This is the weirdest sequence of events. It's like the way I was in my own head. It was like super weird because then I got validation about what I was thinking. So it's like I'm sitting at this stoplight. It's like fucking 12:15. I'm on my way back from Wendy's because like I was waiting until I was watching these fights and the fights were over. And I'm like, I need to get to Wendy's before it gets too late because you don't want to be close to closing because that's when you get the shittiest food. Yeah. So now that I think about it, I was on my way there around 12:15 and on my way home around 12:30 because I remember looking at my clock. So this is where in between that, I'm sitting at this stoplight, like my way there around 12:15. The way that I was like, I could see how if someone is out alone and they get stuck at all the stoplights, it feels like this infrastructure is like about them. And it's like, in actuality, this is just a poorly designed system that like heavily stops you and you get stuck at points. And then the impatient people are the ones that end up running the stoplights and then get pulled over. So as I'm having this thought, like somebody across the intersection from me, like they pull up and they get their arrow. And I'm like, man, what is taking this person so fucking long? Because they're taking like way more than the Indiana. Like Indiana people take a long time to turn for some reason, but they're taking like twice as long as the normal Hoosier to go through this turn. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And then they damn near like come to a stop. And I'm just like, what is happening here? And then they're fucking, the top on the car starts coming down. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's like 37 degrees out. Why would these people be like putting their convertible top down in the middle of an intersection. And then, like, as I'm like looking at having this thought, at night, because there's like 4 people in the car, and I look over and I'm like, are they trying to like race or some shit? What is going on? And like, because they're sitting, it's like on 3rd Street, right in front of CVS at this point. They're basically at a dead stop on the other side of the street, in the middle of the road, not at a stoplight. And I'm just like, what the fuck are these people doing in my head? And as soon as I have that thought, whoop, whoop, these like blue lights come swooping through the intersection. And I'm like, oh shit, these motherfuckers probably just stole this car because they have no idea what they're doing. Like, they're just like pressing buttons and shit. And that's when I'm like, I'm getting the fuck out of here, and drove off. But like, it was like in that moment, there was this realization of like, oh, there is a surveillance state, but they don't actually have the capacity to be like surveilling individuals as much as people think they do. But it's just set up to look like that. And in the process of like having that thought, I'm like, if you're not actually doing anything, they're not like, unless they're just out to harass specific people, it's really difficult for them to have enough time to like just be pulling people over randomly because they got real shit to deal with. And as soon as I have that thought, I'm like, oh shit, here's somebody just stole a car. I'm just out getting fucking Wendy's. There's motherfuckers out stealing cars right now. The cops don't have time to like fuck with me unless I'm actually doing some shit wrong, which is where then it's like, it's a lot easier not to get in your own head about, oh, the cops like follow me. It's not, they don't have the capacity in a lot of times.
Well, I think that's the dilemma with inactionable policy. We've got laws and regulations, and yeah, sure, somebody can get in trouble if they violate these policies, laws, or regulations, but they have to get caught. And then the interested party, the state, has to have enough interest to pursue it. So then they do some calculus of cost and benefit and all these other things. And does it meet the threshold of punishment? And I think so I see a lot of people driving really fast, and we've talked about people driving fast and how there's a time crunch and all this stuff, and the laws themselves obviously aren't observed. People drive 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour in 30s all the time. And I know this because you're just trying to keep up with traffic. So I'm not the one who's causing the holdup. I find myself traveling 40 miles an hour in a 30 zone all the time. And no one seems to think twice about it. But the law exists, the 30 mile an hour speed limit exists, so if something does happen, then they can assign liability and further punish people. I think the surveillance state, by extension, exists for the same reason that people have, for the same reason that there are surveillance systems on businesses, is that people see a camera and they're less likely to do something. And if they don't know there's a camera, then, well, they're just not observant because there are cameras everywhere. But like you said, there aren't enough bodies. There's not enough manpower to observe all of that footage and to make sense of it and to be able to dispatch somebody to go do something about it, because there are, as you also pointed out, there's real shit going on. They don't have time to mess with every single person. Most people aren't even doing anything interesting enough to be observed.
Oh man, one of the things that started this a couple of weeks ago, or it's probably been like 2 months ago now. There was a shooting on campus and then a subsequent car chase, and then they were trying to like locate the suspect. So I started listening to the police scanner, and I just started looking at the crimes that were being committed in Bloomington and how the cops were responding, because all this shit is basically public record. So you can go see what kind of calls were being made to the police and see how they responded. So like what I started to notice is if somebody called and reported that they smelled weed, the cops would be like, yeah, we couldn't locate them. Like almost 99% of the time. And then the only time that the cops would actually could look into it further is if there was like something else happening. Like if somebody had a gun or if somebody was like
Fighting,
exactly. Or if they were like public intoxication, there was always another thing happening if somebody was getting busted for weed. And like I said, if somebody called the cops and was like, I smell weed, even in the dorms, the cops are like, we can't locate this shit. They don't have time to deal with that shit anymore because they have real shit happening, like people shooting on campus now. So that's where I'm like, on the one hand, there are still laws that are like archaic, but I think on the other hand, cops are not enforcing the ones that are obviously meant to just harass people. And, you know, to a certain degree, I'm definitely not letting cops off, but I do think that there are things that, like, it makes their jobs harder if people think that they're wasting everybody's time. So I think that's where it's like the cops don't really have the luxury of harassing people, because in 2021, yeah, if somebody finds out that there was actual cop harassment, there's probably going to be a protest somewhere, and they don't really have the capacity to start dealing with that shit. So the actual harassment cases are becoming fewer and far between because they don't want to actually deal with that shit. No matter what they may be racist as fuck. They may hate black people, but they don't want to deal with somebody protesting outside their precinct. So they're not fucking doing that shit in a lot of cases anymore. So it's like, yeah, filming these fuckers and holding them to task is stopping them from doing it, because then the only times you see it happen is because then the motherfuckers tried to turn off their body cams or some shit, and then somebody else caught them on camera. So it's like, there's enough cameras out there that we're seeing anytime the cops act a fucking fool. We see that shit. There's too many cameras out there. So in effect, it's actually becoming fewer and more far between, but that doesn't change. It like hasn't stopped. So that's where people, it's like we can't be complacent about holding cops to task, but we also can't like ignore the fact that, like, yeah, the cops just can't do that. They're not able to run wild the way they used to be able to because there's fucking cameras everywhere, and they know that shit now. And as long as people are like willing to record, which is the big problem, because then they try to make it illegal. They did that shit for a few years where it's like, as long as people are willing to pull out that camera, cops will drive the fuck away and they'll like leave you the fuck alone. Because it's like, they don't want the smoke. They don't want the smoke in 2021. They really don't. Because it's like, if you're actually being wronged and that shit gets caught on camera, you got a bunch of people that'll come to your fucking support. And they know that shit. That they aren't even gonna be in the fucking state. They may not be in the country.
Yeah.
But it's not.
You don't even have to know them. They just have to see that YouTube post, and then people will come out of the woodwork to be like, "Hey, I'm going to help." And it's really, that's one of those moments where it's like there's still hope for humanity moment when people stand up against oppression, when we work together to break down or dismantle these structural barriers, these institutional barriers that provide a shield to people who are doing something wrong. That they know they shouldn't be doing this shit, but they don't care. That's like the heart of racism and nationalism and ethnic supremacy, all of that stuff. They just don't care.
And at the core, the Christian notion of the individualism above all is what drives that. And it's like that notion is what allows people to be racist and think that they're above other humans. And it's 100% tied to Judeo-Christian constructs of like creating hierarchies of sanctity in that, like, oh, the human soul is more sacred than the animal soul. Thus, they're the beasts of burden and they're under the human's domain. And this allows those people to then start establishing hierarchies within humanity. So then slavery's in the Bible. These people aren't human. We can just use these people as our slaves. It's right there in the Bible. So this is where, again, the racism and the Judeo-Christian constructs of chattel and hierarchies among species are 100% tied together.
wonder how many of those things are fundamental to empire and our modern society itself. Like how many of those things actually make it through all of the layers and attempts to prevent the attempts to form like a secular society. How many of those things are still influenced by religion, though? A lot of things, probably.
Well, and then you get people who will then try to make false equivalencies between African empires and the European ones, because it's like, don't get it wrong in that, not you, but people shouldn't make a mistake. Like there were empires in Africa. There were like, there were like nationalists, not even nationalists, more empire associated imperialist practices. Like those things definitely existed, but they weren't to the same level of chattel slavery and chattel dehumanization that existed in Europe. Like then European and Western like constructs will try to make it as if chattel slavery and treating people as chattel was common among Native Americans and among Africans, but that's not really the case. So that's where them trying to be like, well, they had slaves in Africa back then too. It's not the fucking same at all. Like the way that slavery structures existed in many tribal situations across Africa, it's like they are the lowest family member and they're not property. They're like, it's like you adopt somebody into your family and that person basically shoulders the most work because they're working their way into that family. So it's like, it's a completely different structure altogether. And there were prisoners of war, but the prisoners of war weren't even treated as chattel in the same way as European chattel slavery. So this is why it's imperative that these narratives about African history are not left into the hands of Western colonialist people who want to equate these things to diminish the African empires while simultaneously making it seem as if the African empires were somehow as sadistic and evil as the way that nationalist empires worked in the West. And it's just not the same. There's definitely fucking bloodthirsty African kings that existed that would like sit on thrones of skulls and shit. That shit definitely existed. But those people,
I mean, Conan, the mythology of Conan is influenced by some kind of Western influence. It's not. I mean, but they had to. His throne of skulls had to come from somewhere. I'm not saying it came from Africa.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not that's not like exclusive to empire and
no. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like I'm not trying to make it out as if the African kings were all like roses and these people were all like. Just no, there were definitely some tyrannical, murderous, like dictatorial, villainous fuckers littered in there.
That's everywhere, though, right?
For sure, and that's what I mean. It's like it's hard to create that nuanced discussion without being like, yeah, among those people, there were definitely some evil fucks, but it's like also. The reason they stick out is because that wasn't the norm. Whereas you go to like Caligula was the most extreme, but these fucking emperors were shitheads most of the time anyway. So it's like Caligula was just the worst of the worst that we know of. Most of them were fucked up, and Marcus Aurelius stands out because he wasn't a huge douchebag. He still did some fucked up shit too, but he was just the least douchebag.
Caligula didn't like initiate a collapse of the Roman economy so he could buy all of the land of Rome proper. He didn't sack his own city. There was mass expansion during the period of Caligula's reign.
Yeah, but he was also like
he was a horrible person,
one of the worst human beings to ever like walk the fucking planet.
I think
one of the worst.
I think it's fair to say that Rome has produced quite a few of the worst people to ever walk the planet.
For sure. And our society wants to like put them on pedestals. Also, and be like, well, Caligula was the exception. No, Caligula was pretty much the rule. He was just the worst.
So you just reminded me of something. Like, so much of our history, of course, is written by the victors, the people who ended up in power at the end of it. But there's a strong push to rewrite history in favor of those leaders. And China's doing it right now. They're trying to rewrite the history of Xi Jinping to make it more in favor of a global outlook. And there are a lot of indicators that suggest that that's what's happening. But, you know, we have to wait another 20 years before the history is written for us to observe. But what you reminded me of is that so much of language, even when it shares or has a common vocabulary, it's not always the same language. The language of religion and the language of science sound similar. They both sound like English in the versions that we use, you know, regularly, because we have conventions of communication that enable us to talk about things. But how many of these things mean different things within different cultures that still share like English as a foundation? I wonder, how much of it is a misinterpretation, like the differences between like science and religion itself, and how much of that is guided by the people who get to write the history? Because, you know, we owe much of our modern technological advances to a group of Nazis, and they were rewarded very well for their work for NASA. And we owe a lot of our medical advances to a bunch of really horrible Nazi doctors, and they did some terrible things, but we use a lot of the information that they gained to advance our own medical science. So we won, but we get to rewrite the history. How much of that language then is influenced? We can't. It's not the same language anymore, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, and even further, there's a lot to unpack there. That one of the worst things that has happened in the last 60 years is the attempt to historicize the now in real time. And people have probably not thought deeply about why this is so bad. But as you said earlier, history needs to be written like 20 years later. We need to be recording things now, not trying to historicize them. But we are constantly in historicizing mode to the point that we'll get, like, just as a quick example, like the King Richard movie, it basically historicizes someone who's still alive and memorializes someone who's still alive. There's many ways that it does this, but the way that the Jobs movie, that shit, like, or the Facebook movie, so like Social Network, the way that we attempt to historicize things through the lens of fiction to then protect it from having to be too historically accurate is the quickest way they can create semi-fictional, semi-real demigods among men, such as Elon Musk, because you have Elon going in like Iron Man 2, playing himself, and then going into the real world being like, yeah, I'm going to do fucking Tesla bot, and having somebody dance in a fucking suit, and the media not be able to discern what's the show and what's real. So this is where, like, Elon Musk has never invented like anything hardware based, but you would think that this motherfucker is inventing rocket ships and like cars and charging stations and tunnels and shit like that. This motherfucker ain't inventing anything. He's just got a really awesome PR team that's able to build a narrative that like historicizes his actions in real time so that even his failures look like their successes, because they're able to like reframe the narrative before anybody even discusses it. So this is an element of like, I've been thinking a lot, because I've had this discussion with Yasi about like why it's bad to historicize in real time. But in the same thing, it's like you have historians who specialize in the past being asked to talk about modernity or the things that are happening in the now, when those things, they're not actually informed on those things. They're informed on the precursors, which does not actually make you informed on the things that are existing in
Asking
real
historians to be journalists, basically.
time. Yes. That's exactly what happened. And then there's the line that line no longer exists. And then the problem is people aren't able to discern what is narrative construction around events and what's actual reporting of those events. It's like impossible for lay people to tell, which is then like people who are informed, it's easy for us to look at and be like, they didn't actually say anything right there. Like the way that weasel words work, people can put like 120 words and not actually say anything. But if you're not informed about creating, here's a good one. Virtually infinite. Virtually infinite. That's a weasel word right there. There's no such thing as virtually infinite. It's either infinite or it's finite. There's no such thing as virtually infinite. But you'll see shit like that where there's like contradicting terms that basically like cancel each other out, that are big, haughty, low frequency words that like quantum flux, shit like that, where you see people putting this stuff in their narratives. And then, perfect example is when that judge and the lawyer started talking about the logarithms that affected the cameras. So it's like people, they're using words they don't even understand what they fucking mean, and there were not enough people in the media to call it out quick enough before you have people discussing whether logarithms
they called it out as quickly as they could, but they couldn't get information back because it's not a closed loop. It is a closed loop that we can observe, but we can't inject from the outside.
Yeah.
But,
in the process, there's people who have no idea what they're talking about, discussing things that will affect us all from there forth on. And they have demonstrated they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, and basically should not have been able to discuss any of this shit further based on this horrible demonstration of a lack of understanding of something.
The defense attorney is the one that brought it up. He said that he objects to the use of the iPad because Apple technology uses logarithms to create data. And then when pressed by the prosecutors, he said, well, I don't actually understand the technology. But then the judge went ahead anyway and said, I'm not going to allow it, which then prompted the prosecution to use a Windows laptop on a giant 4K display, and they weren't allowed to zoom in, but it didn't matter because they used a giant display. Algorithms is the word that they were looking for, but algorithms still don't interpolate and create data. That's not how video works.
No.
And they could have accessed, if they were really serious, they would have accessed the raw data, and then they would have had it encoded with a hardware decoder, and it would have just spat out an image onto a TV.
But then this is, again, you have people who have no understanding of these concepts arguing in a legal setting about these things. And this is where I'm like, how many boardrooms in businesses are these same types of decisions?
It's virtually infinite.
Yeah.
So virtually infinite, I just wanted to touch on this one last time. That means that they didn't finish the calculation. They didn't finish running through the entire equation. If it's virtually infinite, that means they're arriving at a number, but they haven't resolved what it is. And like you said, it's either infinite or it's finite. They just haven't finished the math.
Yep. And it makes it seem like there's something cool there because it's a weasel word. And that's what I mean. Most Americans are not aware enough to pick out weasel words when they're placed. And most of the quote unquote journalism is just weasel words nowadays. And that's why the headlines are all weasel words. They're not saying anything. Senator slams critics. No, they didn't. They didn't actually body slam the fucking critic. Like the way that this hyperbole, Dave Chappelle slams cancel culture. No, he didn't. He did not.
Wait, so who's cancel culture?
Exactly.
Is that like a new superhero that I need to
Cancel culture is this abstract concept that fucking right-wing media and in some cases left-wing media have used to put forth this distracting, derailing conversation about something that doesn't actually exist. So then this becomes the narrative of the year, of this year of our Lord and Savior, on this rotating fucking imposed. Like, what I'm starting to wonder is like how many Americans actually understand that everybody doesn't follow their calendar. Because like it's weird to me how many times you'll see Americans talking about Happy Thanksgiving to the world. Like, motherfucker, they don't celebrate this shit. Nobody celebrates this shit. This is our calendar. This is our holiday. There's like billions and billions of people who don't follow the fucking same calendar. Like all those people in Israel, they're supposedly like trying to help all the time. Guess what? They don't follow the fucking Christian calendar. That would be dumb as shit. That would be dumb as fuck. So this is where I'm like, the way that the American centric construct has been baked into our media.
Okay, so my friend from India said Happy Thanksgiving to me. And I thought about it and I said, well, I can't say Thanksgiving to him. He's in India. And so I said, well, Happy Turkey Day, I guess, you know. And so he told me, he said there was a day, Dem. I can't remember what he described. He said that there was something happening in India today. But then it occurred to me, it's like, well, which version of Thanksgiving do people actually mean? Is it the one that we've been told, the Puritan pilgrims who almost died and were saved by the natives? Or is it the actual, what Lincoln signed in as, you know, a way of celebrating a series of victories that the North experienced during the Civil War? Because one of them is fictionalized, and the other is written in our freaking, like, published by our government as the history of this country, a series of victories that we experienced that kind of coincided with November. And then, because we can't celebrate, you know, we can't tell someone Happy Thanksgiving because our pilgrims survived a cold winter. They're not even ours. They're like British pilgrims.
Right?
So
They
yeah,
weren't even American.
yeah, they're not even American.
British.
These are like British colonialists, colonizers. Yeah, telling somebody in India to like Happy Thanksgiving just because some British colonists survived. That's like shitty as fuck. I don't know. Thanksgiving's an interesting holiday though. I like the food because I don't eat it all the time. I couldn't eat it all the time. I'd be sick of it. I think that's why it's a good thing. They only really eat turkey like once a year. But at the same time, it's also crazy right now because we've got this new Omicron variant. Why'd they have to pick Omicron? Omicron sounds like so terrible. But, you know, it's Thanksgiving, and just as last year, everything was on the rise and people were just getting comfortable again and going to movies and hanging out and going to events and all that stuff, leading up to last year's, a year after one of last year's biggest super spreader events. We live in interesting times. It's like the calendar itself is people on this schedule where they have to do things. They have to go be a part of the consumer cycle. They have to go see other people. It's an excuse to do these things that they're used to doing because they've always done it this way. But not everyone does it this way. Where was it you said that we send all the turkey butts? It was like Polynesia or something like that.
I don't remember, honestly.
God, it's like, I remember you mentioned like this weird thing with like turkey butts getting sent to like Southeast Asia or something like that. Because we don't have them here. We don't see turkey butts, but they're like real fatty. Oh, I can't remember.
Oh, Samoa.
Samoa? That's it. Okay, yeah.
That's crazy. I don't like I don't honestly remember even saying that shit, but that's definitely not fake. Yeah, they send all the turkey tails to Samoa. Or yeah,
Big fatty
by
turkey
2007, the average Samoan was consuming more than 44 pounds of turkey tails every year. What the fuck? That's crazy. Yeah, I don't even remember saying this shit, but it's definitely not fake. It's not. I realize, like, I'll be saying shit and I'm like, I know that sounds made up, but that was not made up. Like, so I was telling Yasi about how, like, Bruce Buffer and Michael Buffer are brothers, and like they didn't actually meet until they're 29, and they both had their, like, Michael Buffer was already famous by the time Bruce found out about him, but it's like they were both pretty much working in like sports entertainment by the time they like knew about each other. So this dude just has like, they're half brothers at that. So it's like their father just happens to have two sons that don't grow up together that both end up as ring announcers. And it's like, this shit doesn't even sound real. Like, and it's like, I'm explaining this. I'm like, man, maybe I did make it up. So I had to like look it up, and I'm like, no, I didn't make this shit up. Like, this is like, cause, and this is where I'm like, man, I know sometimes I'll say shit and it's like, damn, it sounds like I made this shit just up on the spot for no fucking reason. And I'm like, well, that's the reason I remembered it in the first place, is because it sounds made up.
No, that's the reason that I vaguely recalled the turkey butts thing. I couldn't remember where they send them, but I remember you mentioned one time like turkey butts, and then just thinking about Thanksgiving, we don't eat the turkey butts.
Yeah,
we don't even see them on shelves. I think the only way to get that is if you go get your own wild turkey, or you go to a farmer and get one of their turkeys like directly from the farm. Ugh. But that tells you that says a lot to me. The average Samoan's eating more than a half a pound of turkey butt every day or every week. Like, that's a lot.
Well, because then you get meals like that and oxtails, where because they were delicacies, they weren't delicacies. They were meals of convenience that got turned into things that tasted good. Then people will come in and be like, I'm going to do my gourmet oxtail or my gourmet turkey ass. And then it's like, people want to like take some shit that, like carbonara, that's like some shit that was born of people not having enough, like ingredients to make full on spaghetti or some shit like that. So then it's like,
it was the coal miners.
The coal miners, yeah. And it's like the way that meal was one of necessity and it became gourmet is like, that shit happens to so many cultures or so many demographics where they're forced to eat something for so long because they're not given access. And then people come, I want to make a gourmet version of this. And it's like, you fucking asshole colonizer.
Well, gourmet.
Colonizing dishes.
Gourmet curry. Gourmet chili. Gourmet gumbo. So
gourmet gumbo.
I ordered a bowl of soup from a local farm to table place, and it came out and it was a bowl of broth with 1-inch cube of potato, a 1/4-inch slice of a carrot, a couple of petals, not even that, like an eighth petal of onion, and a little tiny piece of chicken floating around in it. And this was like $9. And this was before pandemic. This was like almost 10 years ago, probably. And maybe more than 10 years ago. But I just remember things like, really? This is fancy chicken soup? Seriously? What? What the hell? I think that there's definitely a place for, a fancy steak that has a really complex sauce or is just a really fine cut of meat. And then there's a place for a braised dish that has a complex sauce and uses chunks of meat that people would normally discard. I think that's fine. That's great. I think that's fantastic. But it's like the idea of a gourmet pizza to me is offensive. Like there are a lot of things that are derived from, like you said, necessity. There are a lot of dishes that are delivered to us from times of economic struggle, like the Great Depression. So much of our American cuisine was, I think, partially in one way, was stifled by that, and also by legislation to prevent integration of various ethnicities who were coming to America. But that's different. But then also on the other hand, there are like classic Americana recipes that exist today that came out of the Depression because those are the things that people were able to make, that they could, with the ingredients they could afford or could obtain. And in some ways, like, because they have to feed a bunch of people all at once, and no one has time to make really fancy dishes, but then jump ahead 100 years later, and these things, like you said, have been rendered into high dollar dishes, and they've lost their connection. Their history has been trimmed away with the fat that people don't want to eat anymore for some reason, and that's where we are. We have gourmet pizzas, and we remember the first pizza was made for Princess Margarita, but I'm pretty sure that flatbread with some cheese and some vegetables and meat existed long before she ever set foot in Italy.
Yeah, there's definitely flatbread that goes back, I think like 4,000 years, or maybe even 8,000. I forget.
I'm pretty sure flatbread is old as time.
Oh yeah, flatbread is old as fuck.
I mean, I just think it's so nice that they've decided to omit thousands of years of flatbread open face sandwich development to give credit to the arrival of some Spanish princess in Italy.
Yeah, because I feel like what I think they're okay.
I like the margarita, by the way. The margarita is a great pizza in terms of its combination, but it's not the original pizza.
Oh God, no. Because I think it's like, I think there was flatbread in China. Yeah, there's 14,400 years old flatbread found in Jordan. Like, or evidence of that. So like,
that's like a desert
I was
cracker
like
at that
actually
point.
being conservative with 8,000 years. Yeah.
14,000-year-old Jordanian cracker. Mm-hmm. It's like a biscuit. It's a desert biscuit.
Yeah.
It looks like a power bar, probably. God, how many calories in a
So yeah,
power
people
bar?
would make it seem like Italians invented flatbreads or some shit, you know?
Oh,
They gotta.
you could get to 10,000 calories with 100 power bars.
Oh God! Just imagine trying to actually eat 100 power bars, because then that's where.
Oh man, your intestines would get solidified with a giant snake of power bar, and then you would die. That many
my
power
God.
bars would just fill up a person, and they would die. Everything would shut down. You couldn't process that. That would be so brutal. And the amount of water that you would need to actually process, like even just 10 power bars. Oh God, no, that's so bad.
For lunch, you would have a half kilo. They're trying to say the shit they were trying to say he was eating. No fucking way. 3 fried egg sandwiches with cheese, tomatoes, lettuce, fried onions, and mayo, 3 chocolate chip pancakes, 5 egg omelet, French toast, bowl of grits, cup of coffee. That's just for breakfast. Dude, he's puking halfway through that shit. That list, nobody's eating that. That would take like 3 hours to eat.
So
That
like,
would take 3 hours to eat.
that was kind of similar to The Rock's power breakfast that he only eats on days that he works out and needs energy for that kind of
Yeah.
activity. But even then, 7,000 of the Rock's like 12,000 calories come from sushi and cookies that he snacks on all day long. He's not just sitting down and like eating a bunch. He just like grabs them as he's working out. And so even then, and that's mostly rice.
Yeah.
Dude's getting the vast majority of that 7,000 calories out of rice, not cookies.
But have you seen the plates of sushi? Like that shit probably had to take him 2 hours to eat.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There's just like the plates that he eats, the fucking like I love watching it, but there's no way that shit don't take him more than like or less than an hour or two to eat. Like I saw one the other day.
He eats a piece of sushi every time he does a bicep curl. Every sit up he gets
double cheeseburgers and sweet and regular potato fries.
What the fuck? I mean, the starches in sweet potatoes and regular potatoes are consumed differently. I always get like a really fast, like high intensity energy boost plus a lot of temperature output, increased temperature, like when I eat a sweet potato versus a regular potato. It's like twice the energy output for half the duration. Also, during periods of time when I've consumed sweet potatoes regularly, I find myself gaining weight. But I think that had to do more with the amount of butter and cinnamon and sugar that I was putting on them.
Real easy to
ruin a sweet potato.
Well, there's so much like starch in them. It's really easy to get bloated eating those.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, if I get wild weight fluctuations, and it's usually just from water weight. And I think a lot of people's fluctuations are water weight, but because we don't have a good concept of what that looks like, it would seem as if somebody who has low body fat and they're hydrated would have more body fat than they do, but that's just because we don't know what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Because of the way this gets back to the bodybuilders, them going on stage completely dehydrated.
Oh, looking all grotesque.
Yeah, has made it impossible to know what somebody who's healthy and not dehydrated looks like. Because all of our even in the movies, they all dehydrate themselves and do a bunch of push-ups and curls right before they shoot, so they got a pump going. So it's like somebody who's like in shape, we're never actually presented images of them when they haven't just done a bunch of push-ups or curls or some shit, or they haven't starved them. Like they've all starved themselves for 3 days straight before they're on camera. And then we're like, oh, they're really in shape. And meanwhile, they're like passing out from not having enough calories.
Anytime the camera's not rolling, they're doing push-ups or sit-ups or squats or something.
And then passing out because they don't have enough calories. No, bro. What was it? They had to add who was it? I think in the Henry Cavill Superman suit, they had to like create some mechanism to blow air in the suit because they couldn't take him out between takes without having too much time. So he was getting so overheated that they just created some crazy fan to like blow air into the suit so he doesn't pass out. And it's shit like that where I'm like, dude, there's so much, the way that Hollywood actors and the stunt people will get it worse, but the actors still get a lot of the shit too.
Well, that happened to Michael Keaton during the first Batman movie. Well, the first Michael Keaton movie. The suit was so difficult for them to get him in and out of that he just had to piss himself. Like, I'm pretty sure that happened more than once. And that was way back in the day before they figured out how to make the bat suit, like, you know, able to articulate the arms and neck and all that stuff. So he was sitting there, he couldn't move. And he still had to like stand there all rigid and in his piss suit. Because they had to make it out of rubber. Because they couldn't imagine leather or anything else that would actually make sense.
Or even latex.
Fuck's
sake, guys. No, we're going rubber or vinyl or something really stiff. Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's the kind of thing where they got to like coat him in Vaseline to slide him into it.
I wouldn't doubt it, man. I would not doubt it.
But that's like the secret to wetsuits, apparently, is you get that layer of Vaseline on, so you get in there and you have an additional layer of fat to help insulate your body.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
Then you don't get chafed in all the weird places. I saw this. I was down a really weird rabbit hole of neoprene, like chest waders for fishing, and one guy was like, "Yeah, just get some Vaseline in there, helps slide it on real easy." And then, of course, they're talking about wearing a lubed up rubber suit. But that's good stuff.
No.
I imagine that if I bet you could coat your body in Vaseline and then go swimming in colder than normal water, and I bet it would protect you because it's hydrophobic and it will stick to surfaces.
Yeah. I bet it would keep some insulation. So.
Yeah, it's like an added grease layer. That shit doesn't dissolve. It's not like it's you gotta have chemicals to dissolve Vaseline.
Yeah. Yeah, but then that's the problem is getting cleaned up.
Yeah, you have to have a can of gasoline on the other side.
Was it worth it?
I don't know if I'm ever being chased by people and I am the only way to get out is to swim across a cold body of water. I will be very glad to have a can of Vaseline.
Oh man.
You know,
and it's crazy. Like I've never had to actually drive away from anything or run away from anything, but it's like I remember my mom was like introducing that concept to me at age like 9 or something. It's like, if you ever need to get away from somebody, this is how you drive and this is how you there's going to be stick shifts and all this stuff. And it's like, I don't know if people run those scripts like when they have the luxury, because then that's when they get under pressure and then they don't have any idea what to fucking do and just freeze up. And that's where I think there's this element of like Krav Maga kind of practices this shit. Like if somebody runs up on you, how quickly can you take off your seatbelt?
yeah,
Shit like that. Like you gotta make sure to practice taking off your seatbelt. So if somebody runs up on you trying to steal your car, you don't like end up getting shot because you're fucking fumbling around with your seatbelt or some. And it's like little shit like that where, you can't obviously prepare for every situation. The reason I'm thinking about this is there's this bullshit. I mean, he's obviously clearly a bullshit artist, but in his head, he's like a self-defense guy. He's putting out a bunch of TikToks. He makes himself look like a cop. I can't imagine. Well, I guess I could imagine that there are
commando.
Police forces incompetent enough. What's up?
He's a cosplay commando.
Basically, and then he'll be like saying, "Well, if somebody comes, puts your gun to your head in the back. This is how you get away from it. Somebody, you're sitting in your car, somebody puts a gun to your head. This is how you get away from it." And it's like these ridiculous responses to shit where you're like, "Okay, that wouldn't work. You'd be dead right here." Probably dead again right here.
That's like the
and
master.
It's like,
Is it like Master Ken but serious?
I mean, basically. Yeah.
Oh no, that's real bad. At least Master Ken knows that it's a lampoon.
Yeah, no, this guy, unless he's just a really good actor and is lampooning, I'm pretty sure he thinks this shit is real. Because he doesn't look like he'd be a good enough actor to pull it off, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well,
so.
yeah, there's definitely a threshold of obviously this is satire. And then I think the danger, though, is when I think what you're describing is this gray area. Because like the cynical side of me hears what you're saying. It's like, oh, yeah, these all sound like videos about a good way to get shot. Like, and there's no curation of that on YouTube. Nobody at YouTube Central is sitting there watching every video with every tactical self-defense enthusiast to make sure that they're not just making shit up. There's no credentials on YouTube. People show them if they have them, but I don't know.
Well,
that scares me, man. Like the idea that there are that the cosplay commandos are now making their own tactical training videos. I mean, tactical training, isn't that the stuff that we saw of training camps in the Middle East in the 90s? And,
oh yeah, for sure, man.
And these are just tactical training facilities.
It uses propaganda.
Yeah, and so we had what was it? It was Blackwater for a while, and then all the other variations.
Z,
C, yeah, Z.
However you say it, yeah.
I thought I didn't know. I thought it was like XC or C or
I don't know.
Z
I don't know.
It was.
I just assumed it was Z. Yeah, you could be just as right. I have no idea.
Yeah, but that's the thing. So we've got stuff like that too, and except here it's promotional materials to get people excited about spending several $1,000s to go learn how to use their handgun or military style rifle in a tactical scenario. I'm sure some of those people are in law enforcement, or they're bodyguards, or they feel necessary that they need to train like that. And I'm sure that there are a few like weekend warriors who are, an attorney or an accountant by day during the week, and on weekends they gear up and go shoot pieces of metal and blow trees up with tannerite.
Yeah. Those tannerite people, man.
I actually wouldn't mind viewing a tree blow up with tannerite from a reasonable distance, like 400,000 or 500,000 yards, maybe.
No, I've been in the woods when somebody was doing tannerite. Who knows how far away?
Oh,
it shook the ground, and I'm like, nah, I don't want none of that shit. Nah, I ain't fucking with that shit. I ain't getting near that shit. Anybody who's fucking with it, I'm keeping them the fuck away from me, because that's like, I don't know if you saw the video of.
I think it's like half a pound of that stuff is like a stick of dynamite, or maybe it's a pound of it is a stick compressed. Of dynamite.
This dude blew up a car for a fucking, Instagram video or some shit, TikTok or whatever. And he turns around and the fucking car door flies right past him. He's lucky he survived that shit. But this is what I'm like, I don't want to fuck with people who are those types, because those are the ones that end up getting you killed as like an innocent bystander just for shits and giggles. And then they're like giving your eulogy. And then it's like, man, they're the ones that got you fucking killed.
Man, so it's interesting. Tannerite's one of those compounds, because it's a binary agent. When it's in its storage containers, it's relatively safe. It's only when it's mixed. And anybody can buy this stuff, and anybody can transport it across state lines. It's fucking crazy. But to actually mix it and to use it, you're supposed to be licensed. So
go figure.
Yeah. So figure. Once again, even if we had a comprehensive satellite-based surveillance state that could zoom in from 25,000 miles and see the surface of the Earth and watch some idiot blowing up shit with tannerite, even if that existed, they wouldn't send some conservation officer out to go mess with that. They're not sending the sheriff or the state police or the local law enforcement to deal with that shit. The tree already exploded. No one's dead yet.
Yep.
And who cares if you need licensing, because you don't need a license to buy it. Man, did I just uncover something? What if you had to get licensed to purchase an automobile before you could possess an automobile?
Man, the automobile industry is just such a dumb thing to have ever spawned, in that the way that we had public infrastructure that was basically destroyed for the sake of, or let to fail for the sake of implementing automobile infrastructure. It's like, I'll never not hate that, in that I love cars, and what, like, a really well-designed car, I appreciate the fuck out of that shit. But I grew up under the threat of the ozone layer like constantly having holes in it, which we don't even talk about anymore.
Oh yeah, that giant hole over Antarctica right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they closed it.
No. Oh yeah,
okay.
the big one from the
biggest
80s.
one.
Yeah, that one's closed, but there's an even bigger one. Well, it's almost bigger.
Yeah, which is nobody talks about this shit.
Or Antarctica,
so.
and then there's another one over the ocean in between South America and Africa. There's like a huge hot spot where there shouldn't be one.
Yeah.
And
so it's shit like that makes me not. I can't ignore that when it comes to the actual fucking impact of automobiles. Because it's not, they're not the only thing contributing, but they're one of that culture and all of the things that are associated with automobile culture are. I mean, obviously, then there's the U.S. military industrial machine.
I don't think
that's the biggest contributor.
Yeah.
Let's not get it twisted.
I don't think that. I think that the portion of automotive culture that's demanding the biggest, most polluting engines, a significant portion of that is our trucking industry. Like people who want to have a big truck to pull their boat or pull their travel trailer or pull their toy trailer or their thing with their ATVs or their race car or whatever they're pulling with their big truck. On some level, these things only make sense when they're being used, when the truck bed is loaded up and they're being used to go someplace, to take something somewhere, to go accomplish a goal. But oftentimes we see fucking Ford F-150 Lariat, which is like a $70,000 truck, like fully loaded. I might be lowballing that one too. I might be real wrong. And it's got leather and a technology package and GPS built in and all this other stuff, all this technology that's like none of these things are actually necessary for a truck to accomplish its actual role, which is hauling things or pulling things or transporting things that are heavy or groups of people and their stuff to places. And SUVs too that can accomplish those goals. But when those things are used as, transportation to the mall, and they're not hauling anything that you don't need a reasonably sized vehicle for, I think that's when that's when we start seeing a real problem. You don't need a vehicle that can pull 10,000 pounds to go pick up 150 pounds of items at the store.
Nobody actually needs that vehicle. And this is where, again, it's
farmer, maybe?
Yeah, and maybe. But I'm getting at, like, we get our groceries delivered now. And it's like, yeah, we have to go get some ever so often, and the car makes it easier. But if we really need to, we could walk.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily in the winter. Like, even if we want, like, we could just layer up and walk in the winter if we needed to. So there's this element of the only reason we have to is because there's not actually good enough public infrastructure to make it so that we don't need the car to not make our lives fucking horrible. Because there's been winters where I didn't have a car and I would walk like
everywhere.
Fucking 7 miles. Yeah, exactly. Like I would be walking to Starbucks at 4:00 in the morning in the fucking snow because my car wasn't working. So it's like I've been in the spot where I know it's not the car makes shit easier, but I don't need a fucking car. Well, I'll walk out 2 hours early. How
much of our modern car has been spurred by the desire for luxury and the individuality and all that stuff? But how much of the truck was guided by utility?
I mean, if not
until recently,
most of it. But I want to say in the 90s is when
we started really seeing
just trucks. But what you're alluding to is all of the advancements have been in the cab and not on the actual the vehicle.
So with the end of the 90s, the 2000s, that's when we start seeing technology really appearing in vehicles because they kind of resolved all of the other stuff before. They were just kind of slowly rolling it out so they could extract as much wealth from every generation of technology that they'd already had backlogged. And in a sense, the modern truck itself has been the same for the last 40 years. And
which is why you don't need anything more than the truck. You have realistically, if you actually need a truck, you have the perfect truck for actually using a truck.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that is like you're buying some shit you don't need.
Yeah. Like literally the only things that I can think of that I would ever want to haul other than pulling another vehicle on a trailer or something like that. I can do all these things with a small truck. The only territory that I wouldn't venture into is pulling one of those giant ass trailers, like the travel trailers, the RV camper type things, or
which you can rent shit for,
which you can rent things for. I don't have to own a $70,000 truck to pull something like that.
That you're gonna use like 2 times a year, and then that's where it's like, well, I have it now, might as well make it into a business. And it's like the truck, the way that it's over, it's the same shit as computer builds, really.
Yeah.
Like, I'm firmly happy with the build I have being enough for me for the next like 5 years of cycles, in that I may upgrade something, but I didn't even buy the highest end, because anything more than what I have would be completely useless to me. And this is what I'm like, I look at the people who are making the video games, and they're like the ones that are doing like video editing of high quality video. Their shit is like slightly higher than mine. That's exactly where they should be. Yeah. So I see this thing as like, you know, when people buy more than they need because they think they're flexing, we need to ridicule that shit. We need to start making people feel dumb for buying shit that they don't actually need
or use.
Because then that's where it's like, well, you bought this $5,000 computer and only use like $2,000 worth of it. You're an asshole. You're a dumbass.
I bought a old work.
Not you, obviously.
I know. I bought an old used workstation that has a processor that's still competitive, and it has loads of RAM in a configuration, a 4-channel configuration, which you can't even get in the consumer market. And I paid like $350 for it. And the only thing I intend to upgrade over the course of the next 6-7 years is the GPU, which I don't have to upgrade for like 2 or 3 years.
At least, because the game developers aren't even pushing the current GPUs. And this is where, like, when you understand the limits of what developers can do, then you're like, well, shit, because the 40 series are supposedly coming out next year, and I'm like, I can't even, like, there's no reason for me to even think about buying a 40 series, because the developers are still working with the 20 series shit, so and catching up to what the 30 series can do.
I bought the 1660 Super because I wanted to have full support for the flying games, and it turns out
an amazing card.
Yeah, well, it turns out that Ace Combat 7 runs phenomenally on a 1050 Ti, a 1050 card, not even a Ti. It runs at full resolution, everything. It's fantastic. And the only game that I have that doesn't run smoothly is Eve Valkyrie, and it doesn't even take advantage of the full capabilities of the 1660. It just needs needs a little bit extra in the pipelines, I guess, or something. Whatever the difference between a 1050 and a 1660. Like,
that would sound crazy to somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. And that's where I'm like, we have one of our computers
like a negligible difference.
Very negligible. In fact, it like runs on par with the 2060, if not slightly better. And that's where I'm like, I have
the Super, so it has the 2060's RAM.
Oh yeah. And that's where, if it's the Super, then it definitely runs better. Like, it runs better than a regular 2060, because I have a 1660 Ti in a computer, and it runs better than a 2060, where I'm like, not just slightly, but it's enough to be like, well, damn, this is an older card of a lower series that's still outperforming the next generation slightly. So this is where I'm like, the 2060 Super outperforms the 3070, like, just straight out. And this is where, now that I've seen them compared to each other, there's shit that I'm like baffled about how amazing the 2060. Like,
why did I buy this extra card?
And that's where I'm like, if I had the option between the 2060 Super and the 3070, it would really be a hard choice. And it's like, just because something's newer doesn't mean it's necessarily better. And it's like, you have to actually really.
We have to have software that'll take advantage of the capabilities of those chips. Like, we might not even see the games that'll really take advantage of a 20 series card for another 5 years.
Exactly.
We might not see games that take advantage of a 30 series or a 40 series card ever.
Yeah.
It's just going to make everything that we've got already that much smoother, that much easier to do, easier to look at.
Have you played Far Cry 6 at all?
No.
So I played Far Cry. I mean, I still play it.
Wait, that's the game you went fishing on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I think that's
Dude, I put in like hours just fishing on that game at this point.
The coolest
like,
meta game.
It is. I have so much fun. Like I didn't like.
That's
I was like,
the
man,
most zen meta game
to go fishing on Far Cry because it's like that. Your line breaks and shit if you don't have a strong enough line and the fish is too big. You're not just gonna bag a fish just because it caught on the hook. And that's what I'm like, man, they really nailed this to the point where I'm like, I think I've at least put in 2 hours just fishing in that game, if not more. I don't even know because you lose track of time because it's like legitimate fun, and it is like fishing in the sense of like the fish, because you can see the movement probably better. Well, it just depends on where you're fishing at, because sometimes it's like the only time I'll start fishing is because I was like on my way somewhere, and then I notice something moving in the water. I'm like, oh, I need to go cast a reel. So there's like these times where I'm like on my way to do some shit, and then I just start fishing because I saw the water moving. And this is where with these cards, they're so fucking like, the games are barely able to push them to their limits to the point where if you're driving along a road, you'll be able to see the water ripple because a fish is like near the surface or some shit, to the point where it's very close to breaking the uncanny valley.
Oh, it's probably better than actually real fishing, because real fishing, you're standing out there and it starts to rain and it's actually raining on you, and then or you get a nice breeze and then that breeze goes away and you can smell that thing that was rotting over like around the corner that you didn't notice when you first walked up. Or
like climate controlled fishing.
You're not sitting on a boat that's like rocking around, and you don't have to touch actual bait and get that nasty stinking slime stuff on you. You also don't tempt fate with a hook getting caught on something and then flying at you. I'm not complaining. Those are all things that's part of the experience.
That's part of it for sure. But then you don't like, the one thing that's made me averse to fishing is like, I saw somebody, oh my God, I'll never forget this. Cause I was like, I must've been like 6 or 7. I couldn't have been too old, but somebody like tripped on a fishing wire and that fishing hook got caught in somebody else's hand.
Oh
yeah. Like, because, or it was like, I don't even remember exactly like.
But yeah, they have to push the hook through, cut the barb off, and then pull it back out.
Yeah, so it was like, man, like I said, the way that shit went down, it was so fucking traumatic because I was so young. But I'm like, that shit is so easy for that to happen in the like a wrong sequence of events. Anybody can get a hook somewhere on their fucking body. So that's always where I've been like, I only go fishing with a couple of people at a time, because I think it was like Boy Scout camp or some shit.
Yeah.
Or I guess Cub Scout camp at that time. So
yeah, I did the fishing merit badge as a Boy Scout, and it was very rewarding. Yeah. It's the only time in my life I've ever had any time actually like fly fishing, which is really, it's like the most active fishing I think that there is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I remember that was how I learned to get a little bit of distance between the people that I was fishing with, because when you're around a bunch of kids who are all wild and impatient, it's good to have
that's how I learned too.
Some breathing room. But I think it's different on a boat. Like if you're on a boat, you can only get so far away from everybody. And also when you're on a boat, you're already in the place you want to be, so you don't have to go casting crazy far.
Yeah. Well, and when you're on a boat, I guess if there's not like more than 3 people, it's really easy to stay out of the way of their reel.
Yeah.
When they're casting. So it's definitely better or safer on a boat.
Safer from hooks. There are a bunch of things that can happen on a boat that can't happen if you're on the shore, but
yeah.
I think that it's one of those things that fishing is such an old activity. I mean, it's like fundamental, one of the first advanced versions of gathering food, I think.
Right.
And not necessarily with a rod and a reel or even a fishing line. It may have been baskets and streams and spear.
Or by hand, who knows?
But I think that there's something about it it's very rewarding because you have to go into a kind of Zen state when you're out staring at a lake because there's really nothing happening. And it's like right at that moment when almost when you achieve the Zen state, that's when the fish bites.
Yep.
And it's in that moment when nothing else exists. It's just you and that fish, and that thing is fighting because it doesn't want to die. It might not know what that hook in its mouth means, but it knows that it's fighting for its life.
Yeah, that's where.
And then it tastes better because you caught it, and it wasn't something that you just went to the store to get.
Yeah, I always did catch and release. My grandfather would keep shit, so it's like not to say I never caught anything with him. So like he would always catch like catfish and shit.
Yeah.
And then my grandma would cook them,
Man.
clean them and cook them.
Yeah. So I cleaned my first catfish not too long ago. Sheila and I went out to a lake on the north end of town. It was actually very nice, like a 15-inch catfish. And I had to watch a video, and it's interesting because in this video, it's this kid, just some like teenager, and doesn't even look like he can drive, right? And he's sitting there like, and this is what you do, and all these steps. And I remember the one time I watched my grandfather do it, and he nailed the thing's head to a board to hold it still. And so that's what I did. And after I got past that initial like, what do I do? It really wasn't that bad. I was just more concerned, like, where can I hold this thing so that if I slip, I don't cut my hand open? And then what's the next step? How do I get this thing open so I can, like, get the stuff I don't want out of it? And it was actually really easy. The hard part was really just getting over the initial, I'm going to have blood and guts on my hands, and it's going to smell funny.
Yeah.
And skinning it. That was actually pretty weird. But still, the fish was delicious. And I didn't have to go to Kroger to get it. I got to go hang out in nature, and I got to ignore the world for a little while. I got to spend...
Yeah, and that's... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I got to spend time with my thoughts.
Yeah. I was like always over my grandparents when I was younger because my parents would be working.
Yeah.
So I would be there when they would be like cleaning the fish or cleaning the chitlins and shit like that. So it's like, being able to see that shit from a young age, you're very aware of like, oh yeah, this is a fish that lived before and you're about to eat it and it's about to be delicious, but you have to watch all of the steps that it goes through before it's ready to eat. So there's this element of like,
You got to commit.
I mean, beyond that, you understand that there is a life cycle that you are part of that you also can't overfish because it's like they weren't bringing home like fish for the next 2 weeks. It's like, no, you went out and fished, you got a couple for dinner and you processed them and ate them. Like that's how they did it. And the overfishing, the overhunting, the over farming is something that came from industrialism. And that's where I think like being able to see there's a huge difference between catching your own fish and processing it and going to the store and buying like pre-processed shit. I'm not saying buying the shit from the store is wrong, like ethically, but it's a lot easier to dissociate the life cycle from the thing that you go to the store and it's already in fillet and like in a fillet. You don't have to take out the bones. You don't have to cut off the head. You don't have to look it in the eyes like before you eat it. And there's something that makes it a lot easier to reduce the value of that thing's life when you don't have to look it in the eyes before you eat it. Yeah. Like, because I've gone, I've done a few ceremonies on at like Pine Ridge Reservation. And one of the things is like they would pass it's like bison jerky or buffalo jerky around during one of the ceremonies, and it was like you're thanking the animal for it, where it's not a ton of jerky. You're not like taking fistfuls of jerky. It's just like a pinch. You're not supposed, the way that they pass it around, it's like thanking the animal for giving you meat for the rest of the year, but they just pass around a little bit and you just take a pinch, and it's meant to represent like you're actually honoring that animal that's going to feed you for the next 6 months. And you're like, hey, I recognize you lived. I recognize you existed. Thank you for giving me life for the next 6 months. You pass around the plate, take your little pinch. Thank you, the fucking buffalo. Because that pinch represents the shit that they've stored away from that one animal, instead of like killing a shitload and being like, yeah, we're just going to store away all these dead buffalo and fucking we're going to freeze some of them are going to go to waste, instead of just killing one buffalo for the fucking and making it last for the entire season. You don't need to eat buffalo every day.
No.
You only should eat buffalo once a week, if anything. And they understood that, to the sense of like, there's this element of, if you go fishing, you don't actually have the time to go fishing every day, because you're not guaranteed that like you're going to catch a bunch. So you have to be very judicious about your time spent fishing if you're doing other things. If you're a fisherman by trade, that's completely different. But we're talking about somebody fishing for themselves, not to like sell. And this gets back to the notion of like, once you start fishing to sell it to other people, then you start throwing the environment off balance.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where like there's a complete different approach to hunting and gathering what you need versus hunting and gathering just in case. And those are two very different frames of thought. And they're presented as if they're equal in the same ethics, and they're not the same ethics.
Well, I think you described hunting accurately, but I think the other thing you described is farming. It's like harvesting. They're harvesting.
Right. We're not meant to be harvesting animals. We're never meant to be harvesting animals. Like maybe meant to be. I don't even know if we were technically meant to be harvesting their milk. That one's still debatable, because of like, I still drink the fuck out of milk, but I'm realistic about looking at like, if you drink milk, you should be doing a lot of exercise. You shouldn't just be drinking milk for your healthy bones. No, that's fucking stupid. Well, that person's going to end up with like diabetes or some shit.
The calcium in milk is inaccessible unless you have sufficient magnesium intake.
Right.
So back to like minerals.
Exactly. So right there, that whole narrative that we were raised on of like, drink milk for healthy bones. Well, that's fucking stupid. But if you're doing a lot of exercise, like Michael Phelps, the caloric and sugar content of milk is like a healthier alternative to like Gatorade or some shit bars. That's like, yeah, or Snickers bars, exactly. Like a lot of bodybuilders end up drinking chocolate milk instead of protein shakes, because it's just about the same amount. Not the same, but it's like a good enough amount of protein that they can substitute it for their own mental health. So they're not drinking those fucking disgusting protein shakes for every meal. Some of them are chocolate milk, because I've known enough competitive bodybuilders personally that it's like, yeah, they have to like throw in something to keep themselves going. Because you'll see anybody you see walking around with a jug of water in the weight room, they're probably competing. Like nobody carries around a gallon of water in the weight room if they're just casually lifting weights. Well, those are usually the people who are competing. A lot of
protein shakes, you mix water or milk or whatever kind of fluid you want to mix your protein shake. That's just to get it into the system. You still need a lot of water after the fact to process it. And if you don't have the water to process it, oh boy, that just runs havoc on your digestive tract.
They get constipated
Yep.
and then they get bloated. And then those people might gain, if you drink too much protein without enough water, you might gain like 10 or 15 pounds in a week from constipation. And then that's the shit they don't talk about. Because if you know, like I said, if you know enough bodybuilders, over time, that creatine does a job on their digestive tracts, man. And then they like,
Winston recommended that I mix ground up oatmeal into protein shakes. That it helps with it provides a little bit of roughage, but it also comes with its own protein and carbohydrate value.
makes sense.
And so it allows you to thicken it a little bit and add some other liquids like coffee. And so I think there's a way to do it, but it can't be like just about getting protein. It has to be balanced. It has to have it has to have more in it. Otherwise it's like people are tempting fate with building a plastic tube inside their body.
Yep. Basically, that's it sounds exaggerated, but that's exactly what, at the right temperature, it would coagulate into plastic.
Well, protein, plastic, protein polymer.
I mean,
basically.
Yeah, it's effectively plastic.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, again, it sounds like an exaggeration, but it's really not.
Or maybe a monomer, because it's all protein. Yeah. So, anyways, you're right.
I mean, and in tandem with lipids, though, it's not just going to be on its own. There's going to be lipids around it too. That at the right temperature, it's gonna, there's like then a plastic scaffolding that makes it hard for your blood to flow around it because it has manifested itself.
It restricts or inhibits your body's ability to receive nutrients.
Yep, that's exactly it, man. And it's like then this shit will build up around your nodes, or it'll build up around specific
your diverticuli.
Yeah,
the little pockets inside the intestines that pull the stuff.
Exactly. And this is kind of where like the people who end up going super meat heavy, protein heavy diets end up with diverticulitis because the shit builds up at those points and it can't pass. So that's where like Brock Lesnar is one of the most famous examples of that lifestyle leading to him having to get part of his intestine removed because of diverticulitis. It 100% with his diet.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, how long do people actually go pissing out of their ass before they go see a doctor? like I think if you're
amazed, man.
Like if someone is experiencing pissing out their ass for more than like 3 days, you should probably go see a fucking doctor.
Americans are too ashamed to talk about that shit. And then they want to act like there's nothing wrong. It's like, oh no, I got abs. I look great on the outside. This whole digestive system will pass. This digestive thing. And then it's like, you got.
I remember when I decided to quit, that I was like done with drinking like every weekend, like all the time, and partying hard all the time. It's because I was fucking pissing out of my ass like the following Monday, but it didn't last for 3 days. It didn't last for like a week. It didn't last for a month. It didn't go on. It wasn't an ongoing experience. I think I definitely would have gone to a fucking doctor if that had been a thing. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just. I guess it's the idea that, that on some level people are ashamed to go get help when they've clearly got some kind of problem with their digestive tract. That's like scares the crap out of me. That means we've got a society where people are like not just ignoring like societal issues, they're ignoring their own issues. Turning the blinders on themselves. Like, no wonder there's like it's impossible to have a nuanced dialogue if people are unable to be introspective or unwilling to even confront their own issues of too much protein and ass pissing.
What happened to the popcorn lung? Remember that?
Oh yeah, it was vaping, right? Vaping was going to give everyone popcorn lung.
Whatever happened to that shit?
I don't know. The FDA approved Views nicotine cartridges for nicotine vape administration. So it's FDA approved. Vaping is approved. You just got to use the approved method of vaping.
Man, that's so crazy. That shit happened right before COVID. And the vaping lung, popcorn lung just disappeared.
I wonder how similar popcorn lung looks in a scan to COVID lung.
Right? I want to know. I want to have a doctor look at that. I obviously won't be able to tell.
I remember
I'm not a medical professional, but I want to have a doctor look at that shit.
Yeah.
Currently, there's no direct evidence of e-cigarettes and popcorn lung.
Well, there haven't been any e-cig hospitalizations in 2 years.
Weird how that works, huh?
Man,
Weird how that worked out.
did we just get like COVID 6 months in advance of China and then blame it on
Kind
China?
of sounds like it. Kind of sounds like what happened to me.
You know,
I don't know. But the way propaganda's set up,
so apparently
the way propaganda works, it sounds like that's what happened to me.
in all of the states that are big deer hunting states, 80s, like they've all been doing COVID analysis of deer. And it started like in Iowa where 80% of the deer had not just COVID, but the one that's going around, like the Delta COVID. And so people were saying, oh yeah, the hunters are giving it to the deer and the deer are just passing it around. But that's like way too complicated. That's like way too complicated. They've got to be hanging
And how
out.
are the hunters giving it to the deer if they're not killing them, you know?
Well, no.
Or,
They're not like getting up right up next to them and hanging out with them and breathing on them. Like in a tent. They're like getting a deer into the tent and breathing on them and playing poker. And then they say, it's okay, buddy, you can go off now. I'll see you next year, right?
Yeah, like what? How does that transfer work?
So it was well established, like early on in pandemic life, that coronaviruses are very common, that they're common throughout the animal kingdom. And it just so happens that deer have had this thing that causes the one that we got. And we know that bats are freaking pathogen reservoirs because bats contain like everything. And all of the viruses just fight each other or pathogens fight each other for dominance. But most of the time, the bat survives, which is really surreal.
Meanwhile, what if the deer had manufactured the virus?
What if the deer have been the cause of COVID and coronavirus that we are all suffering from? And it really, man, that would just be like,
fight back against the hunters?
well,
They thought the hunters gave it to the deer.
Yeah.
Turns out the deer gave it to the hunters.
Fuck, it's the deer decided to fight back. This is the most M. Night Shyamalan explanation for fucking pandemic world.
Yeah, exactly.
At the end of this movie, the twist is that it's a deer that like walks away, and as it walks away, it turns its head and coughs.
Oh man, we talked about Utopia briefly, I think, but that had to be the worst time release of a TV show ever. Because it's like nobody wants to see that shit right now. I think they canceled it before the full series had even been released.
No, they did. They did.
Yeah.
And I don't.
It was decent, but it's too on the nose, man.
It had good potential, except it just became too fucking real. Like we're not supposed to be watching
Wilson.
We're not supposed to be watching a documentary like that's produced ahead of time.
Right.
Like we learned the lesson with Idiocracy, right? Apparently.
Oh,
we
man.
didn't.
The pessimist filmmakers should not be the historians.
Oh.
But here we are.
Yeah. Here we are. You know,
I was
Omicron
actually-
just sounds so bad, though. Just the name.
Well, just because Americans aren't like, they all think the Greek alphabet is like fucking spooky. Like, is it a transformer? Like, no, it's just a natural progression.
Well,
Alphabet.
It actually makes me think of Lure of Omicron Persei 8. And how
I bet it'll be COVID Pi and then COVID Rho next.
Yeah, it will. We're gonna get
Sigma Tau Upsilon.
We'll get to Zeta, and then like they'll have to start over with something else.
Yeah. And then the COVID Omega will be really spooky.
You know, it'd be nice if COVID Omega was the last one. That would just be poetic, but I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, eventually they're going to have to give us COVID 22. Maybe that's what's going to happen after COVID Zeta.
Oh, man. COVID 45.
Oh, man. It'll happen in like 3-year intervals. So COVID 22 will be COVID 2025 and...
Man, I don't know if I said this earlier, but I got my booster shot a couple days ago, and it's like, I don't even feel sick, but my lymph node is swollen, so I feel like I'm fighting COVID. It feels like I'm fighting COVID, and this is where...
Well, that's your body creating antibodies.
Of course, yeah. And it's like I actually am in tune enough with my body now that I can feel it fighting off the disease or the virus, which is where I'm like, man, I feel bad for people who are not this in tune with themselves, because it's like, this is how, between getting the vaccine and masking up all the time anyway, this is how I've managed to get this far into it and not even remotely get a symptom. So this is like, science works. I love science. But further, it's like the people who use science to their benefit and actually make it extend their lives instead of being the people who inject fucking
horse
hydrogen
paste.
peroxide or some shit, or horse paste. Like we're evolving past our current peer, like the what would have been framed as our peers, like because we're actually applying science to our lives. We are closer to Homo scientifico than Homo sapien, or like whatever it would be, in the sense of like we're actually a combination of our genetic precursors, but we also modify ourselves with science.
Yeah,
like we are that wave, but like to be there's going to be a wave of us, and then there's already people within who are modified within the womb. And like, what's his name? I mean, it's been going on for decades, but there's
I think it's really important that the language of science, the conventions that we use to communicate, are not rewritten by outsiders who don't actually use that kind of language or use those communication conventions. We can't allow, like, for example, religion to define the conventions of science and what those words mean, because I think that there are people who will confuse the understanding of hypothesis and theory and observation with the same kind of anecdotal experiences that govern faith. Because for some people, observation can end with one person, whereas for science-minded people, we all want to observe it, but we can take the word of 1,000 peer-reviewed studies that say the same thing. We don't need a singular source to define what we believe, because it's been peer-reviewed by people who've spent their lives dedicated to this very thing. And it doesn't have to suffer like endless translation to appease some court or king or group of officials who are from some kind of insular society that only promotes from within.
Well, and I don't think academics have the onus to make their work accessible to people who are not willing to put in the time to become specialists in that thing, in that...
Well, at the very least, learn how to read it.
Right, exactly. Because then the notion that academics need to make their work more accessible, that's just not actually
No.
accurate. They
I'm not a
don't need to be
specialist,
people
but I
doing
will
that.
invest the time to learn how to read those documents so that I can understand what the science says. It's not easy, but it's the kind of thing that, it's enriching because, as you pointed out, Homo scientificus is more than just the sum of genetic code. It's also incorporates intelligence and information and uses that information to make better decisions, guided by information and observation and repeated observation. I mean, people in Asia have survived numerous plagues, and they have a culture of masking. There's a history of masks. Masks work.
Yep.
How much of this other stuff can we actually observe? And like, vaccination has gone back to the Revolutionary War.
Yeah,
So
at least.
it's not like it's a brand new thing. Vaccines have been around for a couple hundred years at this point.
Yeah, at least.
And the scientific process itself has existed for thousands of years at this point.
Yeah, in various forms.
I mean,
like proto-science is
Like Taoism
Still-
is really old too. That's
Yeah.
like a proto-science spirituality.
they don't have enough capacity to reproduce across like varied environments, but that's why it's proto-science and not full
Yeah.
science, but they're still like looking to observe.
They're trying to get it to be replicable.
Right, exactly. And that's why, they're on, you can see it's on the way.
I mean, eventually the Taoist alchemists made gunpowder, so I think that's when it crosses to really officially is definitely science at that point. Let's make a rocket, guys. Something about that though is like akin to the Tannerite crowd. Like there's a part of me that's it finds all that stuff fascinating, but there's also like a limit to how close that I'm actually comfortable. Like I said, 1,000 yards. I'm pretty comfortable at 1,000 yards. I think 1,000 yards is far enough to watch a tree explode. 1,000 yards is a long fucking distance.
Yeah.
Like that's binocular range.
Yeah. I think that's good. That's like I feel like that's about what the Mythbusters would do.
They would get behind like a wall made of a double thick wall of cinder blocks too, and then fill all those cinder blocks with cement.
Yeah. The way they did the exploding cement truck was pretty badass.
Man, those guys, they've got one of the coolest gigs ever.
R.I.P. Grant Imahara.
Yeah, man, that guy.
Yeah, he was fucking awesome, man.
That whole crew, they got to do the funnest, like most absurd things. That was like the best version of reality TV that I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, right. That's definitely one of the best, if not the best.
I don't think I can't think of anything else that even approaches Mythbusters level of and just raw entertainment and cool factor and real information. Like this
I really enjoy
tangible
Project
information.
Runway. I would put Project Runway up next to Mythbusters. Like, if somebody was really open to watching it, to like understand what was happening with the drama and like what it actually takes to make the shit that they're doing, and it's like that's where it's like a very similar type of pressure. They're both under like especially in the early days of Mythbusters, because they didn't do this as much in the later ones, but they would have like time pressures on their builds. And it's like the same thing with Project Runway, where it's like, see what you can do within this amount of time, in that giving somebody on like the later seasons, they got basically unlimited funding. but they had to get to a point where it's like, we want to see what they can do with unlimited funding, because limited funding is actually more interesting, and limited time is actually more interesting.
I think you nailed it. There's only so much that we can really see with unlimited funds, or without limitations. Without limitations, virtually unlimited. It's like so much of our creative history of art and music and literature. Those were wrought with limitations. Just there, you can't extract limitations from the creative process.